Finally, the end of an era. When I say this is the end of an era, I really mean it. So here's the truth. Yes, Godzilla movies are broken into many eras. The Showa, the Heisei, the Millennium, and of course there's the ongoing legendary MonsterVerse. But really, in my opinion, this is the last of its kind. Godzilla movies always stuck to a true tradition. Man in the suit, practical effects that may be dated by Hollywood standards, but Toho insisted to continue the tradition, using CGI just sparingly, commonly for the under-the-water sequences with Godzilla swimming and such, or kaiju flying. Regardless, from here, this will all be dialed back, in favor of CGI and motion capture. Now granted, yes, we will see some traditional Godzilla suits in shorts like the Godzilla vs. Hedorah short, but this element hasn't been a staple since 2004. So Final Wars would be the last film for we really didn't know how long at this point. We just knew the Godzilla name was being retired. As a fan, I remember this was slightly underwhelming, this announcement. I want to say from 96 to 2000, around that time frame, before Godzilla 2000 came out, I spent a lot of time exploring every Godzilla movie I could possibly find in whatever existed in my local stores. But starting with Godzilla 2000, I'd become accustomed to having a new Godzilla movie at least every year, only to find out we're going to have to say an early goodbye. You see, the difference between this film and, say, Terror Mechagodzilla, where they ended Godzilla series just really spontaneously, or Godzilla vs. Destroyer, which basically they essentially just killed off Godzilla. This one ends the series as they had originally intended back in the day with Destroy All Monsters. So, we're gonna have one giant monster mash with several faces we have not seen in forever. If anything, Final Wars is one giant tribute to the Showa era, with its over-the-top battle sequences that are borderline cartoonish, and reintroducing kaiju that hadn't been seen since the 60s and 70s. Pretty well anyone and everyone you can think of is all back in this film, one way or another, with maybe a few exceptions here and there, such as Megalon, Gabara, the Giant Condor, Mechagodzilla, which was likely not in this film because he just appeared in the last two films. I've seen a few theories and in-universe reasons of why Mechagodzilla likely isn't in this film. The obvious reason is probably because of, the budget. Obviously it wasn't in the budget. This movie's budget was already strained the way things were. But if you want a fun fan theory, the idea is the Exilians, which are also in this film, they're not even aware of Godzilla in the first place. In this film, they don't realize Earth has a Godzilla to defend themselves with until he becomes a problem up front. The point of what I'm getting at exactly is they can't base their concept or idea of a machine on something they don't know even exists in the first place. Regardless, I think we would have all loved to have seen Mechagodzilla or Kiru in this film rather than the Gotengo, honestly. But this would have led to the idea of introducing a new incarnation of Mechagodzilla, since Final Wars does not share the same timeline as Tokyo SOS or Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, even with the post-credit sequence. One particular name that was missing from this film was King Kong. Now King Kong, like the last time that Godzilla left, is now returning in 2005 with his own film. I thought of all things it was interesting to see three things in this film. Another Ghidorah variation, and Gigan is getting a lead role. Finally, no kaiju from the Heisei era or the newer Millennium films do star in this film. They are all basically just pushed to the side in favor of older kaiju that hadn't been seen in years. A lot of this I'm gonna assume it's because the director of this film was just basically not a big fan of the Millennium or Heisei era. He held the show in extremely high regard. Feeling that the Godzilla series had lost its touch in the 80s, as basically he explained. My perception and take on what he was trying to say, essentially, is the movies from the 50s to the 70s were basically reflecting on what was going on in the world at the time, and the movies kind of addressed it. I respect this take. The Showa era is amazing for what it's worth. But it's kind of hard to sit back and disregard Godzilla 1984, which is literally about the Cold War. That movie was addressing something very direct that was going on at the time being. Even Godzilla vs. Biollante had its own message. So the results of this film, you either love it or you hate it. Oh, Godzilla Final Wars, there is no in-between on this film. I'm gonna confess something that I've never said before. When I first saw this film, I had to force myself to like it. I did not care for it. Every time I was asked about it, I was like, yeah, that was a good movie. But deep down, I found it to be disappointing. But how has this movie aged nearly 20 years later? Okay, so Godzilla Final Wars opens up with an action sequence with Godzilla doing battle with not a kaiju, but the Gotengo instead. All in Antarctica, which leads up to our future hero being sealed away in what becomes known as Area G. Then after that, we get one of my favorite moments in this film that I have to turn up the TV, the volume to the max.
Its name is...
This tribute to Godzilla. 50 years reflecting on everything that's happened, explaining also the idea of this film, which I'll get into more as I deep dive into this. But yes, this package video at the beginning though, it's amazing. Not long after that, we're introduced to Douglas Gordon, who is perhaps the MVP of this film. For those unfamiliar, the role is played by Don Frye, who is notorious for his work with the UFC in the early 90s, and since has remained close to the Godzilla fandom, and his character is one to watch in this film. But Gordon, we get a good look at his I play by my own rules mentality as he leads battle against Manda, who is the one kaiju who I don't know if he's under the control of the Exilians. It's never exactly really stated in this film, he's just kind of there in the beginning. I'm assuming he is, before they even knew about the Exilians and their plans. Regardless, he's the first expendable kaiju in this film. The aspect that was added early on in this film introduced was the mutant humans, which does give me extreme X-Men and Matrix vibes. You will notice this as the film progresses. Now this idea of these mutant humans is kind of one of the issues some fans have with this film, and I can kind of see why. Now on my end, I never know if I applaud or hate this aspect, because part of this does feel like watching Exilians versus mutants eats up more screen time than necessary. It's not something that a viewer exactly looks for in this film, especially if you know this is going to be the final Godzilla for some time. But really what it does do is does illustrate that everybody is fighting for their life, from humans, mutants, to Godzilla himself. Now the reason why I don't want to be overly critical is some of these fight scenes, especially near the end, that feels like a live action anime, like as possibly close as we can get to having a live action anime. Everything is just moving so fast in this film, and that's one of the things with this movie. The pacing of it just continues and never stops. Areas in this film that kind of lose me are sequences like the motorcycle battle sequence, which are just a complete eyesore to me. Sitting there watching some filler scene as you keep on waiting for Godzilla to appear, we haven't quite really seen him appear yet. And when I say eyesore, I mean I hate the filters in this film. It insists on using these orange filters. Look, filters are fun in photography or filming videos. My issue here is it takes away from the vibrance. According to my understanding, I guess the German version does not have these filters on. If you know anything about this version, please do tell me more. Final Wars also does play on the idea of some conspiracy theories such as aliens rising up to the government gaining power, or a rogue planet smashing into Earth. But it plays out exactly as you would figure if you've seen enough Godzilla films. You know, someone tells us they're gonna help us and then we're put in pure danger. Remember when an alien race promised to give us the cure to cancer? Or how humans from the future promised to remove Godzilla? You do the math here and you've got it. Eventually this movie does kick it into full-blown kaiju mode as they begin mysteriously appearing around the globe, threatening our existence. In the process we get one of the most unnecessary scenes in the Godzilla series. You know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to elaborate on any further, I'm just saying it's highly unnecessary and does lead up to Rodan being introduced at least. What's with the Looney Tunes sound effect here? Rodan is trashing New York, and Gearus appears King Caesar, Godzilla 98. No! This is a new trademark, Zilla, which is simply here to be part of the most single-handedly epic, petty moment by Toho, literally getting wrecked as Sum 41 plays.
I knew that tuna head wasn't up to much.
This is where this movie grabs my attention and goes all in as we get this destruction tour. Godzilla's free, extremely OP, killing everyone, with the exception of his 3 allies from the Showa era. That is a nice touch in this film. Now while all of this is happening, we get a subplot which I hated in this movie back in the day. You know I despise Minya, but this is where this film goes too serious, to cartoony. As an adult, I'm proud to say that I can accept the fact that Minya is in this film. He really plays into the ending of this film, the nice happy ending, stopping Godzilla from destroying the little of what is left, the little of what he's saved in this world. With Godzilla in this film, the angle and approach is that Godzilla is still an anti-hero, rather than portraying him as a flat-out hero. He's the anti-hero. He's helping us, but is indirectly helping us. He's just killing everybody that's in his way, essentially. He still has a problem with us. And this is where Minya plays an important role in this film. He's the peacekeeper, convincing his dad to let go of the past. Now in this film, Godzilla has to have a perfect final boss battle. And boy does he have his hands full with Gigan and the new Monster X. The good news is Godzilla will have an assist from Mothra. And it's really poetic to see Godzilla and Mothra working together in this film, despite all their differences throughout the movies in the past. They put aside their differences to team up and take on Monster X and Gigan. The war on Earth is their battle together. So now we have our first tag team match since Godzilla vs. Megalon. Look, the final battle sequence in this film, epic as hell. Nothing on the set of this film remains intact, all buildings wrecked. My only issue is we get sidetracked with the Exilians versus the mutants. That's one thing I have a problem with this film. We really should have dedicated the end of this film totally towards Godzilla. However, eventually the focus does get back on Godzilla as Monster X transforms into Kaiser Ghidorah, and this is where Godzilla gets pushed to his limit. He may not make it. Godzilla is just completely gassed out. The good news is we will get a quick intervention though. Godzilla is back in full-on war mode. Kaiser Ghidorah gets the living shit beat out of him. Happy ending. No kaiju with the exception of his friends King Caesar and Geras and Rodan are spared. Godzilla and Mania head to the sea. And yeah, this ending is enough to make me feel something. I watch it and I can't help but smile. It was at this moment I knew Godzilla Final Wars would be the last of its kind, closing 50 special years of Godzilla. When I think back on this film, I always remember how it came out during a new phase of my childhood. I want to say I was just turning 13. It would be for 10 years Godzilla films be sidelined. But gradually as I became an adult, I never forgot about how every Godzilla movie, whether I loved them or I hated them, made me crack a smile. Look, I'm gonna be honest. I know this movie isn't perfect. There's certain things I will call out. The soundtrack is a tad excessive for me. It's at a constant always. Some of the soundtrack is pretty damn good and pretty memorable. Then there's other bits which to me just feel like generic video game music. The truth is, Godzilla Final Wars, it's a significant movie in its own right. Feels like one grand celebration. A Godzilla movie with a fusion of Independence Day, Matrix, and X-Men, all thrown into one. It feels like a genre of its own for Godzilla films. And yes, the Monster Mash idea, grand celebration had been done before with Destroy All Monsters, but this movie is its own distinct entity. I can't guarantee you'll like it. It's growing on me, and I mean it. The thing that will always come to mind about this movie is how much I panned it originally. And while yes, I panned it then, one thing that kind of hits me is I stop and think, this probably was a comfort zone movie to some young kid that was just getting into Godzilla. Just as I had the movie Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, which was my comfort zone movie. So if you like Godzilla Final Wars and it is your comfort zone Godzilla movie, I ain't trashing you. That's a wrap for the first 50 years of Godzilla, but there's still more to come. The Monsterverse, and then some. A new door is opening, but before we open that door, we've got to talk about the one Peter Jackson King Kong movie. If you thought I wasn't going to review that, you thought wrong. We'll get into it next time. Thanks for watching. This has been Glenn Destruction with Godzilla Final Wars as I see it. See you next time.